Welcome to the show today, folks. I'm really excited. One of the privileges I get of hosting this Encounters with God podcast is just talking to some just fantastic people that really are just scholars and theologians. And, our guest today is no exception. I've been looking forward to my fellow Texan, Chad Bird, being on the program. Chad, I was just telling him I have an issue with Chad's writing we'll put his books in the link in the description box, but you know, Chad writes in such a way that when you start his book, you don't want to stop. So I've learned now after several books that, if I'm going to pick up Chad's book, I need to start 7 o'clock in the morning so I can knock it out in one reading. But his first book, wow, we're going to be discussing it today. And I don't know, depending on how it all goes, we may have a chance to talk about his latest book, Hitchhiking with Prophets. Fantastic read as well. But this book is Night Driving. Night Driving. Notes from a Prodigal Soul. Not a prodigal son, but a prodigal soul. So, Chad, welcome to the program today, sir.
Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation, and thanks for the kind words about my books. That might be one of the best endorsements I've ever received. So thank you. I'm glad that they have resonated with you.
My viewers know I don't blow smoke, so this is full-on endorsement. So, yeah, I loved it. But so, Chad, you're a fellow Texan. So, I know in the book you kind of start where you're in college or seminary, the first chapter. But maybe tell us a little bit. You were raised in Texas. Now, were you brought up in a Christian type family? Did y'all go to church? What, maybe give me a little backdrop on that before we jump right into chapter one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I was raised in a Christian family, not just in name, but in practice. I was born and raised in a small town, born in a small town in New Mexico, and then my dad, who worked in the oil field, received a job offer in the Texas Panhandle, so we moved to Shamrock, Texas, which is where I spent most of my growing up years. We were in the Southern Baptist tradition, so we were in church a lot. As a kid, I felt like we were in church all the time, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening sometimes too. But my parents were both raised in Christian households, and so they didn't just kind of speak of being Christians, but they modeled that both in their prayer life, their Bible study, going to church, raising my sister and myself in a family that really honored the scriptures and kind of just set out for us what the Christian life looks like. So I give thanks to God that even though I'm not in that tradition anymore, I give thanks to God I was raised that way because it really grounded me in the Word of God and just taught me about what is most important in life.
Hmm. Well, did they have any influence about your calling? You felt like, okay, when you went to college, did they foresee that, my son could, I know you were the first in your family to graduate from college and then, of course, go on to seminary and so forth. But um, was there any influence there that, my boy's going to be a minister or hopes and dreams of mama?
Well, if those were, then they were never voiced. So I never felt any pressure to go into the ministry. I do think perhaps my parents picked up on that possibility. I can remember as a very young boy. I think I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and in our Sunday school, we were encouraged to memorize some verses of the Bible. So always being an overachiever, I memorized Genesis 1. It's in its entirety. And our pastor asked me to recite that from the pulpit one Sunday morning. So perhaps my parents picked up on that tendency and interest of mine early on. But it was never like kind of a family thing. The only person in my family that was in the ministry was actually my maternal great grandmother, who was a quite a fiery Pentecostal. I think that probably the best way to describe her in the kind of the backwoods of Arkansas. She was still alive when I was very young. I wish I'd have known her when I was growing up. Just have some very faint memories of her. But anyway, that was no really, besides that, no no pastoral background in my family, but I think it was more than anything else was my parents modeling of the Christian faith, which nurtured within me this ability or this tendency that the Spirit kind of fanned into flame for me to go that direction.
Mhm. And when you went into seminary, you really thrived there. You like the theology, the intellectual challenge, and you really you're kind of in your zone with that.
Yeah, I was. I'd had various interests growing up. I was an outdoorsman. I loved to hunt and fish, but I felt like when I finally got to seminary, as far as like a vocational passion, like my place, I discovered it. I loved studying theology. I loved kind of the academic discipline. I loved just kind of diving in deep into the study of whether it was the early church or whether it was the Bible or whether it was doctrine, whatever it was. I just really thrived in that atmosphere. And so it was then as a seminary student that I really began to think about what might be. And for me, the might be was to actually become a part of that vocation that I admired so much, and that was being a professor. I had several professors that I looked up to that were models for me, and I really admired their work, admired what they did at the seminary. And so, even though I wanted to be a pastor, kind of a longer range goal for me was to, if possible, to actually become a professor at the seminary. So that at fairly early on, I would say in my early 20s, I started a
Mhm.
seminary, I think when I was 21 or 22, that became my personal goal.
Yeah. In fact, one of the seminary professors, I think you write about that, he encouraged you, said, look forward to you, being my teaching partner, teaching beside me or something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my last year at the seminary. I started getting some pretty strong hints from some of these professors that they would love to see me back at the seminary. So even when I left the seminary, began pastoral ministry in a small town in Oklahoma, I kept in touch with some of my professors there, and they continued to strongly encourage me to think about graduate work, kind of with the plan of when I finish that graduate work, maybe coming back to the seminary to teach. Things happened much faster than we originally had planned. But anyway, that's what they were already kind of encouraging me to think about as soon as I left the seminary was to come back, in fact, to teach.
Mhm. And so you moved to Oklahoma, you pastored there for 5 years, a small church in Oklahoma. Um, I can't remember. Did you have your two children during that time and you came back, or was that?
Yes, I did. So yeah, yeah. So I married in college. I think it was halfway through my junior year. I got married, and then my wife and I had our first two children, our two children, our son and daughter, when we were living in Wellston, Oklahoma, which if you one of the small towns, if you blink, you miss it. uh, just a little ways outside of Oklahoma City. That was where my call was to serve a small church there. So my wife and I moved there, and while we were there, our daughter was born in 1998, and then a couple of years later, our son Luke was born, both in Edmond. So our family began to grow, and those years of serving at that church were really formational for me. I was still very young when I got there. I think I was 27, so I had a lot of learning to do, a lot of maturing still to do. Being a pastor is a huge responsibility. So I had to just kind of picked up a few bumps and bruises along the way, but also just a lot of wonderful prayerful support from the people that I serve. So it was a good formational time for me during those 4 or 5 years.
Your whole goal there while you were there was, you and I appreciate your honesty. A lot of people nowadays they get, that's not me, that's somebody else. The woman you gave me, shift it.
Yes, right.
Uh, but you said in your book that I look back on that, and one of the things I was really using them as like a stepping stone or a tool to
Yeah.
get me to the seminary, and so that's when I guess that was one of the first places in your book where I thought, man, this guy's real. He's not
Yeah.
trying to sugarcoat this. He's not trying to make himself look better than what he is or anything. And
Yeah, definitely was going on with me. I suppose all of us have mixed motivations for doing things, but the uh, the bad part of the motivation for what I was doing was, as you put it, to use this as a stepping stone, because my goal really was to engage in academic work. So I wanted to get preferably back to the very seminary where I had studied. And to do that, I knew that I needed to I need to arrange my life in such a way that I would be attractive to the seminary. So you got to be a good husband. So I strove to be a good husband. You got to be a good father. So I strove to be a good father. You got to be a good pastor. And so I did my best to be the best pastor that I could. So I was, as it were, trying to shape people's, not just people's, but the seminary's perception of me to make me an attractive candidate for someone who would be teaching there. So in so doing though, what I ended up doing was, yeah, using my vocation there as a stepping stone for what I really wanted, and also using my other vocations in life, whether it was a father or a husband, to to achieve this greater goal. And kind of behind all of this was, and I point this out, of course, in the book Night Driving. Behind all this was just the fuel of ambition that was driving me onward, selfish ambition. This was, and I hasten to add this too. At the time, I was unaware of much of this. You know, it's like a lot of things. You look back on your life and you're able to discern. You're like, oh, what was I thinking? Or now I realize what was going on there. Uh, so I look back and I'm like, ah, goodness, you know, there was so much that was happening with me that was nothing more than kind of an ego-driven ambition to make a name for myself, to achieve, you know, to do
Mhm.
great things, not great things for God, even though I would have told you that what I was doing, but it was really great things for Chad. Yeah, I was doing this for yes, like I said, mixed motivations for God, but also for me. I wanted this. I wanted to do these wonderful things. So it was a slow growth, but a slow and steady and really a deadly growth that was happening as I more and more kind of gave into this ego-driven ambition.
So after 5 years, you get the call from the seminary. Um, did you have to pray about that, or do you just know I'm just, this is God already. You know,
Oh yeah,
we're
yeah.
gone.
I don't think I did much praying, honestly. I I knew that this is what I wanted. So I'm sure that I told people I was praying. Kind of put up the pretense, you know, like we often say, well, let me pray about it, but we've already decided what we're going to do, you know, many of those situations in life, or we use it as a stall tactic, right? Well, let me pray about that. We
Yeah,
already know what we're going to do.
we're going to be spiritual with this. We're gonna pray about
Yes.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. How many times have we used prayer as an excuse just for delaying a decision we've already made? But yeah, it was me. So I think I waited a couple of weeks in between when I announced to the congregation that I'd received this invitation to go back and teach, and before I officially announced that I was going. But yeah, I had already announced. I mean, I'd already decided this was what I was going to do. Because again, this was my dream. This is what I wanted above all else.
Hmm. So you're back at the seminary, and things start rocking for you, man. You're on your glide path. You're in your zone. Your denomination has a publishing wing arm, and you start publishing. Of course, conferences. You have to get up on the platform. Chad Bird's in the house.
Hmm.
Round of applause. Thank you for Chad Bird's. Here, um, and just the students. So this your wife began to notice, as I think you honestly say before you did, your ego began to kind of grow. And she said, hey, buddy, take it down a notch. But you just felt like she was trying to hold you back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I mean, you get into this position where criticism is very difficult to take, you know, especially from someone like your spouse. You know, I felt as if she was just like you say, trying to hold me back. But what she was really trying to do was help me. You know, I just couldn't see it then. I mean, she we're terribly blind to our own faults. I often say we have 20/20 vision when it comes to seeing other people's weaknesses and faults, and we're often blind to our own. So what I didn't see, she saw, and what she saw growing, as you said, was this kind of this growing ego. I think the way I put it in the book was, so I earlier I had viewed the position at the seminary as something that I was just not worthy of. I mean, that just really wasn't worthy of it. But then once I got it, I began to kind of accept this idea of entitlement, like I had proven myself and I was entitled to this.
That's a
And
dangerous spot.
oh, terribly dangerous
Yeah.
spot. Yeah, you open yourself up to all kinds of spiritual attacks when that is going on. Um, and yeah, I look back at that time now and kind of shake my head and thinking, my goodness, did you not see what was happening to you? And I didn't. Uh, I, I I was blind to what was happening inside me, what was happening around me, and blind really to the path that I was going on. I don't. It's not an excuse. It's just kind of the realism of the situation. I mean, how often have we seen sinners in situations where we can see, like we say, hey friend, you keep going down that road, you know where
Yeah.
that's leading, and
It's so
they
clear to me. I could
so
see it.
clear to me.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to help
yeah.
you, Chad. Hey,
Yeah, yes, right. Yeah. Well, this is kind of a side and it's sort of a jumping ahead to what we're going to talk about in a second, I'm sure. But just recently, within this last few months, I was engaged in conversation with a gentleman where he was heading down the path I've already been down. And I was trying to tell him, I mean, in as loving but as forceful a way as I could, because I can see the direction he's going, but I could tell at least from the way he was reacting, that my words were falling flat. He wouldn't see it, or he refused to see it, even though I was trying to lay it out as clear as possible for him. He only saw what he wanted to see, and that's kind of the way that I was. I only saw, only heard what I wanted to hear. I kind of filtered everything else out. So I was on a pathway toward a cliff. And even though at least my wife saw that and tried to warn me, in the end, I just kept right on walking toward that cliff.
Hmm. So you're you're a distinguished professor, you're conference speaker, you're all this and more, and you begin to have an affair.
Yeah. Yeah, this is exactly what happened. The the ego that came with pride and everything else, then I don't know how the best way is to say it. Almost kind of had this invincibility. I kind of do what I wanted to, or maybe also this sense of a lack of spiritual caution, because I felt like I was no longer really pushing to achieve what I wanted, that I'd got there, and so I could kind of relax and drop some of my guards, let my guard down. And when I did that, I opened myself up to all sorts of temptations. And chief among those, of course, ended up being lust. And the affair that I had began the way I think 99% of affairs begin. They begin with what we think of as innocent flirtation, with emphasis on the innocent part. Oh, there's nothing really going on here, just innocent flirting. And then, so it begins, in other words, with lies. We lie to ourselves, and we lie about it being innocent, or we lie about it's not gonna go any farther. We're just gonna do this. We're just gonna do this. We're just gonna do this. And then after a while, this whole string of lies ends up in the place where it always ends up, in actual physical adultery, which is where I ended up. Well, then once you get there, what are you going to do? Well, then you're going to either confess what you've done, or all of a sudden then you have to live a whole life of a lie, where you're lying to your spouse, and you're lying to other people, and you're lying to yourself, and you're probably lying to whoever you're having the affair with too. Lies just beget lies, until that's all your entire life becomes, this one great falsehood, because that's the only way that this pretense can be kept up. And so that's where I found myself. I was living a life that was characterized by falsehoods, lying to myself, lying to everyone else around me, because if I would have ever stopped and been honest with myself, I'd have realized that I was no longer walking toward a cliff. I'd already fallen off the edge, and there was no going back at this point. So I tried to protect myself by just wearing this armor of falsehood, and of course, in the end, that that didn't work either. Everything came undone because you can't keep these lies to yourself forever. So my wife found out.
I think you said you tried to compartmentalize it. Maybe that's not the right word in the
Yes,
book,
yes, yeah.
but so, okay, I'm faithful to the Lord and all these other areas, and my teaching is correct doctrine or whatever, and all these
Hmm.
things I'm speaking truth, and so, but that lies just over here.
Yes,
That's a
yeah,
small piece of my life. Or it's a small piece of Chad Bird.
right. Yeah. Compartmentalize is the exact word to use. So this I tried to think that I could kind of keep everything contained. So in this little compartment I could have an affair, but it wouldn't affect, my marriage. It wouldn't affect, which is, I mean, even to say that is so ludicrous. I mean, everyone realizes it. It sounds ludicrous. And yet to me at the time, I thought I could do this. I could keep this contained. I could keep kind of this pond of polluted hazmat affected water over here, let's say, and then over here I have a clear pool, and they're side by side. But I deluded myself into thinking, okay, well, this one thing is not going to poison everything else. But excuse me, of course it did. I mean, it poisoned everything. Oh yeah, yeah, it poisoned everything. But yeah, compartmentalizing is what I thought. I could be over here, I could be professor. Over here, I could be friend. Over here, I could be husband, father. And then over here, I could be adulterer. And I could kind of keep all of these parts of my life from affecting each other. But of course, they did. And it began to penetrate every aspect of who I was and what I was doing until finally, when everything became public, then the end result was what the end result was always going to be: utter destruction, the implosion of my life, and shrapnel everywhere. Because, of course, it wasn't just me that was affected; it was everybody around me that was affected as well.
I like what you said. One line was, "My life was haunted by the dreams I trampled underfoot."
Mm,
You're all your
yeah.
dreams, and you're just trampling on them yourself, not
Yes.
anybody else. You're
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah. Nobody else to blame. Yeah. I mean, it would be nice if I could point a finger elsewhere, but I can't. Ultimately, all of the blame falls upon me. And so I was responsible for the destruction of that which was most precious to me. My vocational dream was destroyed by myself. It's the old who's the true enemy? Well, it's the person you see in the mirror. They're the ones that you worry about the most. Yeah, so all the dreams ended up becoming nightmares, becoming untrue because of what I had done.
So it's just got to rip your heart out. I mean, I appreciate again your honesty in the book. So you're sitting there, and the wife's leaving you. The two children are crying. They're driving off in the car with her. Um, man, that's how the mighty have fallen.
Yeah, I'll never forget that day. Uh, yeah, so we were living in the Midwest at the time, and my wife then was leaving with her parents, had loaded everything up, and the kids were turned around in the back seat waving at me as they drove away. And yeah, never will. That's one of those memories that's just emblazoned upon my mind that will never fade. And one of those, it's one of those scenes that just captures in one image the everything I was going through: shame, guilt, fear, confusion, chaos in my life. Everything by which I had defined who I was, what was important, my future, everything was now gone. And so for that reason, I was in a state where I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where in the world I was going to go from there. Uh, all the things which I had done to establish my self importance were now demolished. And so I was at a pretty low point, not knowing where to go from there. And I wish I could say that was rock bottom. It wasn't, but that was the beginning, at least, of God's what I would think would call his undoing of me, so he could finally begin to put me back together. But it was a long process. He had a lot to undo before he was ready to redo me.
No, so from there you end up instead of teaching career, you're got a promising career with FedEx. Uh, working
Yeah.
at night, you were stacking boxes. I think you call that the boxes in the trailers, the wall of atonement.
Yes. Yeah. So I st- I was working on uh my doctorate at the time at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. I was teaching at the seminary, but I was also working part-time on my doctorate. And so I stayed after the kids would move with their mom back to Texas. I stayed for a few months in Cincinnati. And then then I moved to Oklahoma City for a few months. And during that time, I was trying to finish up some of my degree. And at nighttime, I was working at FedEx. And so I was loading boxes, stacking cardboard boxes, one upon another. So there I'd gone from being a professor to now a nighttime evening employee at FedEx, just doing the hard work of stacking box upon box and beginning, beginning to think that there must be some way in which I could atone for my sins. Beginning to think that there must be some way in which I could make myself penitent enough, make myself low enough to where God might accept me back. That was a long process in my life where I thought that if I could just do enough to feel bad enough, then maybe eventually God might forgive me. But the beginning of that, was at FedEx, and then it continued as I became a truck driver after that.
Yeah. So yeah, as it continues to unfold, you end up meeting another woman. We kind of move forward. You met another woman, and you thought, okay, life's maybe starting to come together for me. I've got my kids. She has her kids. Fresh start, and yeah, okay, Lord, let's move forward with this. Let's turn the page. And 7 months, the 7 or 8, so
Not long.
it's
Yeah,
not long. Yes,
not
less than a
long.
year,
Yeah,
folks.
less than a year. Yeah,
Yeah,
less than a
she
year.
hits you with
All
some
that.
news
Yeah,
that kind of took your heart out again, man.
yeah. It was terrible. Yeah, what happened was so I had moved back to where the kids lived. This was the Texas Panhandle, and I do people. When I talk about this, I always will say this. I made a ton of mistakes during that time of my life. The only thing that I did right, and the only thing I did right was I promised my kids I would be where they were, and that I would always make sure that I was where they were. And that's what I did. I ended up getting my CDL. I got a job driving a truck in the oil and gas fields of the Texas Panhandle, moved to Pampa, Texas, and began driving in the oil field there and lived there for a few years. And during that time, I met, I didn't meet, I got reacquainted with someone I'd gone to high school with, and then she and I married. But it was a short-lived marriage. Unfortunately, it lasted less than a year, and it was one of those things that hurt so bad because I'd become convinced that this was God's gift of a second chance to me. That he was, as it were, saying, "All right, I know you've had it really rough, Chad, but look, I'm gonna give you a second chance. I'm gonna give you a new love. I'm gonna give you a new marriage. I'm gonna give you a new family. I'm gonna give you a new start." And so I had begun to hope once more, begun to think, okay, well, maybe the worst is over, and I can somehow kind of get a life back again. And then, just a few months after we married, she came in. It was fittingly a cold winter day, literally a cold winter day. She came in and said, "I don't love you anymore, and I want a divorce." and just ripped everything out from underneath me. And it was then I think that the true bitterness really crept in because I felt deceived by God. The earlier thing I had kind of begun to get to the point where I had accepted full blame for what I'd done. But then when this happened, I really did feel divinely deceived, as if God had set me up for a massive failure and heartbreak. And so I had a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness after that that I had to work my way through, and realized in the end that this was this was not God setting me up. This is nothing more than human weakness, uh, of which we're all susceptible and all capable. And but that was a long time in coming. My initial reaction was anger, bitterness, and just kind of a feeling of I don't care, just kind of apathy set in because I was like, well, what's the point? You know, I'm not certainly not going to dare to hope again because that hurt. It hurts way too much to hope and then to have that crushed beneath my feet.
Eat, drink, and be merry.
Yeah, yeah, that was kind of that was my very very dangerous attitude for a while. I didn't care about marriage. I didn't care about almost anything. I still cared about my kids, but besides that, I didn't even care about myself. It was a dangerous time in my life because I was flirting with despair. I mean, true despair. And thanks be to God, He rescued me from that. But it took a while to kind of begin to look away from the darkness and into the light again.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned the truck driving and west of the oil field and all that. But the Psalms really ministered to you. I think Psalms 88, was one of the powerful ones. I think toward the end of the Psalm, he says, kind of remind me of Paul Simon, "Hello, darkness, my old friend."
Yes. Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
but it's,
Thanks.
that the darkness is all around me,
Yeah.
and I love that about the Psalms, and I appreciate you bringing that out. Is just the honesty, like I think the chapter where we move forward is like, where the hell are you, God?
Yeah.
All this is going on. I mean, we don't have to sugarcoat our feelings. God knows what we're thinking and feeling. We can lay it out there just like they did in the Psalms.
Yeah, they became a lifeline for me because it was only there that I discovered any way that I could talk to God. I was filled full of highs and lows, anger, bitterness, confusion. I was like, I don't know how to pray. How do you even address a God where you don't really know where you're at with him? I mean, is he far away? Has he turned his back on you? Is he angry with you? Are you angry with him? But the more that I began during that time to turn to the Psalms and to just pray these Psalms word for word, one after the other, Psalms like 88 and 13, and a lot of other ones, I realized, oh my goodness, well, this is exactly what I need. This is where I'm at. When I was praying these, it wasn't like I was praying somebody else's prayer. When I said, have you forgotten to be gracious? Or how long will you hide your face from me? I was like, this is expressing exactly where I'm at. So I could take these prayers and knowing they come from God, and I could pray them back to God. And it was such a relief to be able to be honest, to say basically, where the hell are you? What's going on? Are you angry with me? Have you tossed me aside like trash, or are you doing something else? I don't know. I don't really know what you're doing with me, but the Psalms gave me the ability to voice that. And I tell people all the time the Psalms saved my life. And I truly believe that because they gave me finally a way I could communicate to God and know that I was heard.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think so many people too is when you get to that point, like many people have, and if you haven't, you get there sometime, I'm sure. But it really opens your eyes. It's one thing to read those Psalms as I'm this seminary professor and teach them, okay, this is Psalm 1, blah, on and on, or whatever. Uh, but when you're in the midst of what you're going through and life's uh, challenges and troubles, and just the reality of two failed marriages, your kids are not living with you, those Psalms are just a lifeline, and that at different times, I've read Psalms and I thought, oh yeah, that's a nice Psalm, but when you experience something later on in life, you go, wow. And I saw it back then, but now I see it.
Oh yeah, it's a you move from, oh, that's a beautiful piece of poetry, or to, oh, what a nice theological insight, which both of which may be true, but you move from that to, this is God's gift to me. This is exactly what I needed to pray, because this defines exactly where I'm at. It's whether it's Psalm 88, where you end with all my acquaintances are in darkness, or you begin Psalm 13 with how long, how long, how long, how long, wherever it is, you're like, this, yes, this is me. This is exactly what I needed to say.
Yeah. Psalms 46, my God is an ever present help in my time of need. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, you know,
I need you now.
smoke the mountain. Let's have the lightning flashes, let's
Right.
get on with it.
Yes.
Bring it
Yeah.
down, let the glory fall. But yeah. So this is the process really here where you really, as you says, God creates something out of nothing, going back to Genesis 1. And God really began to unmake you so that he could make you.
Yeah, that's precisely what happened. I think I took that line from Martin Luther, where he said somewhere that God continues to work in this world the way that he's always worked. In the beginning, he created everything out of nothing. And so nothing continues to be his favorite material. So that explains a lot of life. How many people have, you and I are talking about this situation, but you and I have both had lots of conversations with people over the years, where fellow Christians, where they talk about, a low point that they were in, or a hard patch they went through, or a dark season in life, whatever you want to call it, where they usually in hindsight realize that God was greatly at work during that time to shape them in ways that they never would have been able to be shaped otherwise. And maybe it was grief that led you there, or maybe it was a terrible mistake, terrible sin like I did, or something else. Well, what's happening in that time is, when there's less of us, there's more that God has to work with. The lower we are, the better he sees us. And so he begins that process of taking the nothing that we become, and to remake from that the person that he wants us to be. It doesn't mean that we're now going to be perfect. It just means that he's going to kind of glue the pieces back together in a new sort of way. So that, for instance, in my own case, I realized with a much greater depth of understanding the danger of pride, the danger of ambition. I can remember about 4 or 5 years ago, someone meant to compliment me, but they'd said something like, they called me ambitious. And it felt like a slap in the face, because that's the last thing I want. That is, first of all, the last thing that I'm driven by anymore. And certainly the last thing I want anyone to see in me as ambition. In fact, when my wife Stacy and I married, which was 11 years ago now, I was beginning to write just a little bit then. And I asked her, I said, if you ever see any ego or pride exhibited in me, please tell me immediately, because I want to stomp that out right away. In fact, she's told me over the years, when something good did happen, maybe it was a book contract or whatever it is, and I was less excited about it than she thought that I should be, this was me just kind of exercising self-discipline. I don't want to give pride a foothold at all in my life. And so it's one of the reasons I'm honest about these sorts of things and willing to talk about things that I've done in the past, is because I want to exercise the destruction of pride, the destruction of any ability that has to enter into my own life.
Yeah. Yeah. A friend of mine, and he lives over there close to where you are. You may know him, Dallas Home, a famous Christian songwriter. I think he's probably not best known for Rise Again, but he's an author as well. But Dallas always says, he says, God has done his best work in my life in my darkest times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things. It's like you never ask for it, but you know when it happens, that's what's gonna take place. I mean, this is apart from night driving, but I'll go ahead and bring it up anyway. So 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, just a little over 2 years ago, we lost our son Luke. He was 21 years old,
Well,
and
you lost him when you were writing Hitchhiking with Prophets, didn't you?
yeah, yeah, I did. I did. Was in the middle of writing that book when I did, and so I say that because that was the beginning of definitely the hardest and darkest time in my life, the lowest point in my life. And not I thought not driving was going to be that what we've been talking about, but that was nothing compared to losing a child. But I also realized, not right away, but 2 or 3 months after losing Luke, that I was now in another one of these phases where during this darkest time in my life, that was when God was once more doing his work of bringing me close to himself and making me realize just the fragility of life in this world and how much we need God and just the what really matters in this life. And so and I bring that up because you don't ask for these things. You don't create these situations, but you know that they're going to come. Now, it may be for some people it's cancer. Maybe for some people it's divorce. Maybe for others it's a sin like I committed, or maybe it's for people like myself also. It's the loss of a child or a spouse. And you don't ask for these, but you know they're going to come in one form or another. So when they do come, you realize, okay, this is a time when I know that God is going to be at work to make less of me so there's more room for him and to draw me closer to himself and make me rely upon him more because we can never get enough of Jesus. But it's in those times that we realize acutely our need of him.
Mm, yeah. Well, I have to bring up one story out of the book. I don't know if it's quite sequentially in line here, but
Hmm.
it really gripped my heart. Was your children were staying with you, and you were about to tuck your daughter into bed, and just the innocence of your daughter, this had been just like building, and she said, "Daddy, why did you cheat on Mama?"
Yeah, yeah.
And
Turning point in my life, really.
wow,
Turning.
that
Oh, it was yeah, it was heartbreaking, and also at the same time, it was one of those heartbreaking moments, but also one that God used. So what happened was, yeah, a situation was just you described it, and when she said that to me, I could have just avoided the question. I could have lied. I could have done any number of things, but the gift that God gave me that night was honesty, and so I was honest with her and told her in terms a child could understand. I confessed to her, and she forgave me. And then when I walked out of her bedroom, I felt this weight that lifted off my shoulders. Uh, and I began to realize there, just kind of in a small way, that very soon grew, that freedom was found not in hiding my sin, but in being honest about it. Freedom was not found in kind of tucking it away and not letting anybody else know about it, but in actually being honest about it. And that was the beginning of what allowed me to write a book like Not Driving, to confess my sin, to be open about it in such a way not to glamorize it for sure, but not even to kind of wallow in it, but more to say, okay, this is what I did, and let me tell you what God was doing in the midst of all of this. So let me tell you how I destroyed my life. But this isn't about me. This is about the God who took this destroyed life and put it back together in a different sort of shape. And I tell that story, and I freely tell that story, openly tell it, in order that people who are in a similar situation might hear that and say to themselves, you know what? I'm in a similar place. Perhaps there's hope for me too. And I've heard from untold numbers of people, whether they're in prison or whether they're coming out of a bad case of addiction or going through the divorce or whatever it is, where they've read the night driving book, and they've resonated with that because they have been in that same place that I was once at. So I'm very grateful that that night with my daughter was a turning point where God taught me the value of openness and honesty, because liberty and forgiveness follows from that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so great. And, you use a phrase in the book where a lot of people, you call it decorating the darkness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 It was especially early in the years how I would I got used to the darkness and was scared of the light. And I use a story there that my dad told me. He grew up in West Texas, and he and his buddies would take their greyhounds out at night. They would go to this place and they'd hunt rabbits and coyotes or whatnot. And so they got to know the roads, the ruts really well in the around the Lubbock area where they hunted. But they went out there one night, one day. You know, they knew this place by night. They got out there by day, and they were lost. They were lost in the light. I think it's kind of like that with us a lot of times too. We get used to the darkness, and we're afraid to walk in that light. And that was me. I mean, I was afraid to walk in the light of honesty, in the light of being truthful about what I'd done. But then I discovered that's where God wanted me to be. So walked into that light of liberty.
Well, I like how you said here too. I think it's page 12 and 13. And I think so many people have just views of scripture or God's people, we're uh holier than thou and all these things. But I'll just read a few of these titles here, man slaughtered mass slaughter perpetuated by brothers to avenge sister's rape. That's the headlines. Two daughters impregnated by inebriated father, Lot and his daughters. Gang of men attempt to rape a man's guest, Lot and I mean, folks, these are not the sinners out there. These are God's people.
Yeah.
And I think you really bring that home, not, to switch gears, but even with hitchhiking with prophets,
Mm-hmm.
that, we're talking about, real flesh and blood here, real life. And I could go on and on, spiritual leader discovered drunk and naked in his home, Noah, they would all make the headlines. And yeah,
Social
we see.
media would have a heyday with that, wouldn't it?
Oh, yes, yes. You can make a lot of money with that, man. You spread
You
that
could.
around on Instagram and,
Yeah,
Twitter, and boy, you get a lot of followers real quick.
sure would. Sure
Report,
would.
I'm a news reporter on God's people, folks. I'm
Yeah.
just telling
Yeah.
the truth here.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. And
gospel.
I mean, it's right there. It's right there. I mean, all that's just from Genesis. You keep going to the other
Yeah,
books of the
yes.
Bible, and
We
then there's
hadn't even
even
got out.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We hadn't even got out of the first book, have we?
One of the things I love about the Bible is it doesn't try and whitewash. It doesn't try and cover up the weaknesses and the failings of, yeah, not just the Sodomites or the people of Gomorrah, but Lot, nephew to Abraham, or Abraham himself, or whoever it is, Moses, Noah, so on and so forth, Jacob's family. All of these people were believers. All these people were in the family, the community of believers, and they failed big time, just like people do today. And yet God continued to forgive them, to uphold them, to even use their sins and their failings to kind of shepherd history toward the goal that he had designed for us. So I find great encouragement in the fact that the Bible is just full of a lot of messed up people, because we fit right in.
Yeah.
Fit
Yeah,
right
we do.
in.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's refreshing that we don't try to, I mean, it's just so commonplace now with ministers that, I mean, it seems like every month, especially here in Texas, somebody's getting caught in sin, adultery, an affair, whatever. And I mean, wow. I mean, you know, um, but it always seems to be some type of a cover up,
Yeah.
or we're trying to, you know, well, this
Change
was
the
this.
narrative. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yes. We're going to spin this a different way. We don't want the church to come off a bad thing here. And,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
I
but
just, again, I appreciate your honesty in this. It's so refreshing. Yeah, you're not trying to glamorize, your sin. You're saying, hey, I'm broken. This is what I
mhm.
did. These are the mistakes I made. Don't go down this path again.
Yeah,
You'll
right,
hurt yourself. You'll hurt your family. You'll hurt your loved ones. Learn
right.
learn from what this idiot's been through. Help me.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know, I discovered that when you're transparent, when you're real that way, um, you know, people people resonate with that because we do have to deal with so much what's the word? Well, not fake news, but like fake personal news, I guess. We're putting forth an image out there. Maybe it's in real life, maybe it's on social media that or maybe it's just in church on Sunday that we've got our act together and we've got the perfect little family here or whatever it is. And we all know that's not true. We all know that we've got problems, we've got struggles, we've got weaknesses, we've got addictions, we've got whatever. And we're all aware of that. And so if we can just be honest about that and say, this is what I'm struggling with, or this is what I have struggled with, people will realize, oh, yeah, so this is where we're all at. We're all and we all thus stand in need of the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. We all stand in need of forgiveness. And so we find out that we're the community of the broken. And that's what the church is, the broken but beloved, the sinners but the forgiven. And the more that we can just kind of seep ourselves in that forgiving grace of God in Christ, then the more then we can actually not only find joy and freedom for ourselves, but actually find joy and freedom in community as well, as we realize we are all in this together, and we're also at the same time all in Christ together.
mhm. So, as this process that God's bringing you back to Himself during this time, and so really kind of, I know now you're with the 1517 scholar in residence and back at it full bore, writing books, full ministry. You're out lecturing again, speaking at conferences. Um, what was the how did you get from there to where, say, the daughter and
Yeah.
that phase here, and you've remarried and things are going great with Stacy, and um, to your ministry really starting to flourish again, where you could say like Joseph, those things his brother did were, all this was evil, but God used all my sins and mistakes for His good.
Yeah, it was a long process. I guess that's but the best way to summarize it. I began right before Stacy and I married. We married in 2013. Right before she married, I began to write just a little bit, just blogging, that's all. And when we married, I began to write a little bit more. And I was scared at first because I didn't know, somebody might take a shot at me, literally or metaphorically. And several did, but I kept at it. And then the more that I wrote, the more it seemed to be doing fairly well. I'm just talking on social media. But all of a sudden, a publishing house reached out to me and they were interested in having a conversation. So we had a conversation, and the end of that was Night Driving, the book we're talking about. And then I had another publisher reach out to me from Baker, and I got a two book deal from them. And I didn't pursue any of this. I didn't reach out to Erdman's. I didn't reach out to Baker. They reached out to me. And I took that as kind of God's way of saying, hey, I'm giving you these opportunities. I didn't pursue this. Just God opened up these doors for me. And then over time, I got connected with 1517, started a podcast with them called 40 Minutes in the Old Testament, and began to do some more work with them until at the end of 2019, they hired me full time to be a scholar in residence. But all this, I early in our marriage, Stacey and I prayed that if God wanted me to do these things, that He would kind of open up the door and shove me through it. I had planned and plotted out my life in my early years, and it all led to my undoing. So I didn't want to plan and plot anything. I wanted Him to open those doors and show me the way in, and that's what we would continue to do. He introduced me to 1517. He introduced me to the publishers, and he continues to open up opportunities for me to do podcasts and to do videos and to speak in front of congregations and conferences and to write books. And so I continue to just give thanks to God for the chance do now what I never thought that I'd be able to do again. I really thought I'd be a truck driver the rest of my life,
Yeah.
but God had other plans. So I love the way that you quoted what Joseph said. You know, I intended a lot of what I did earlier for selfish ambition and for selfish gratification, and God used my mistakes and sins for a greater good, to bring me down and then to work on me and to redo me to be someone that he can now use for the good of his gospel.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've known a lot of people, and they've always said this, that though everything was painful, it was dark, I felt forsaken. Um, I wouldn't trade it for anything. What I went through, what I came through, God has used that so much, to such a degree that I'm a totally different person, that I can empathize more with people. I can pray more effectively with people. Um, I didn't have that before this happened, or or whatever the circumstances may have been that they went through, some, dark night of the soul. And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. I mean, as uh as painful as those years were, I give thanks to God that he used those for his greater purposes, and pray that he will continue to do the same in my life.
Yeah. Well, kind of put a bow on this for us. Give our listeners just a word of encouragement, or a word of, exhortation to, for the Lord, and I'll just give you the last shot here.
Yeah, sure. I would say to folks wherever they're at in life, maybe they're maybe they're having the best year they've ever had, or
Yeah.
maybe they're having the worst year they've ever had. Whether you're on a high or whether you're on a low, what matters the most is not what you've done or not what's been done to you, not what you've gained, not what you've lost, but what matters most is the fact that God the Father saw you and said that he loved you so much that he was willing to give his son to live, to die, and to rise again for you. And it is that gift that defines what matters the most in life. It means that we are the beloved of God. It means that we are reconciled to the Father. It means that no matter what happens to us in life, good or bad, highs or lows, that nothing can separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ. And the more that we hear that, the more that we believe that, the more that that defines who we are and what's most important in life, then come what may in life, everything in the end will be okay because we are right with God, and nothing matters more than that.